go.
Okay, let's do it. Let's hop in. It's so good to meet you. Thank you so much for taking a minute out today. I appreciate it.
You got it, Joe. Happy to be with you.
So let's begin our journey with this. Looking at the calendar right now, being in mid March is like it's the whole COVID thing. 6 years ago, this thing changed our lives. How did you get through that era, and how has it changed the way that you live and do things today?
It's a profound question because COVID for me was a intersected with sort of an existential question in my life, which is who am I without my work and without my job? Because I was privileged to be the executive director of this amazing organization in New York City called Dancing Classrooms. It was an organization that brought ballroom dancing and social dance into public schools in New York City and around the country and even internationally. And I had been a teaching artist. I had come up through the organization, and I was at the time I was its executive director. Now that was up until December 31st, 2019. My wife and I had moved from New York City to Rhode Island, and I was working virtually. We were already virtual at that point. And so I was going back and forth between Rhode Island and New York City. I was enjoying it, but after a while that became unsustainable. So when I left the organization, right 3 months later, the world shut down. And so many of us were on this forced sabbatical. Now, for the first couple of months, that was great because I had a chance to breathe like so many other people did. But Joe, I'm going to tell you, after 6 months of that,
Yeah,
it was hard because I now had to decide, wait a minute, who am I without this work?
yeah.
And I started working from home a little bit and doing different things, some freelance work. I did some admissions work at the school where my wife was leading. But COVID was a difficult time, not just because we were in lockdown for a year and a half, not just because we were surrounded by awful news all the time, but also for many people like me, particularly people in my work, in my field of work, which was social dance. Um, the pandemic shot a heart right through that
Yeah.
because my work is about people coming together to dance, and we had to be 6 feet apart.
Yeah.
And so it just made that particular work, frankly, impossible.
Yeah.
So it was a long journey, and I eventually found my way out of it, and happy to talk more about the results of that over the course of our conversation here. But that was a really fraught time for me personally, kind of psychologically.
So I want to flash forward to today. There's a lot of titles, there's a lot going on. You have this right left brain world coming together. If you had to explain to a group of 13-year-olds at career day what you do for a living, how do you synthesize that for their brains?
What I say is dancing brings people joy. Social dance is the kind of dance where people come together to move together to music. And what I do is I bring social dance into spaces, whether they are spaces for children or spaces for adults. And I use social dance to build teamwork, to build confidence, and to build community. And that can look like a lot of different things. And I've done it in a lot of different environments. But at the core, what I am a proponent for is the power of social dance to change lives.
So what did you want to be at that age? What was your dream job?
Oh, at 13? Oh,
Yeah.
at 13, I was clear what I wanted to do. I wanted to be the Puerto Rican Bryant Gumbel. I wanted to be a TV news journalist. I wanted to be like Bryant Gumbel on the Today Show. I wanted to be like Phil Donahue, who had his own talk show. Like I was one of the few 10, 11-year olds in the Bronx who would come home from school and like rush to put on Phil Donahue because I just thought, wait a minute, there's a job where all you do is like read books and like talk to people on TV and they pay you to do that. I didn't know what that was called. I didn't know it was, I mean, I had a sense of what journalism was, but didn't really know anything about the industry. I just saw the people on TV that I thought were really cool and I wanted to be like. And so I eventually majored in journalism and communications in college. My first careers were actually in public relations because that's where all of my internships were. And so I wound up going into PR, which my journalism friends said was going to the dark side. But it wasn't until I met someone who introduced me to the world of dance that I made a career pivot. But if I were to talk to well, and even when I do talk to those 13-year-olds at career days and things, I say sometimes the first thing you choose isn't necessarily where you end up, But the skills you pick up along the way
Yeah.
are always going to be useful.
So take me back to your beginnings. Where were you born and raised? What were these seeds, these foundational elements of loving dance, of being in this nonprofit world, of spreading this joy of dance in all the different capacities that are your life today? How did this happen?
So I'm born and raised in the Bronx, New York. I'm a New Yorker. I'm a Bronx kid at heart. Born and raised to parents from Puerto Rico. They were born and raised in Puerto Rico, and like so many people in the Great Migration of Puerto Rico from the 1940s through the early 1980s, many Puerto Ricans were coming to the American Northeast looking for economic opportunity, work opportunities for lots of macro political, social, and economic reasons. And so my parents were no different. They didn't come together. They actually met while they were in New York, but they were here to make a better life for themselves. And and I came along, at some point there, and was raised by parents who unfortunately had experienced discrimination, particularly around language. And so I have very early memories of uh, of being told that you are not going to learn Spanish because sometimes speaking Spanish in an English dominant society is going to discriminate you. You will be discriminated against. And so English was all I was spoken to at home. It was the only language I spoke growing up, even though Spanish, the language of my homeland, was spoken in the background. And so between having this language deficit, which I write about in my book, I don't speak Spanish, but I understand everything when I'm dancing. I write about this sort of intersectionality between language loss, language shame, and identity, and finding dance, particularly salsa dance, finding a new way to connect to my heritage, to connect to my culture. And over the course of my career as a teaching artist, as a dancer, as an instructor, finding ways to integrate and become whole, kind of with whatever shame I was feeling around language, finding that completeness in dance. And so, my father was a salsa musician. At night, we were a musical family. So dance and music was always in the background. But it wasn't until I was a young adult where I actually got to find it for myself and carve out a career and carve out a path sort of in this space, bringing it to adults and to children.
So who's been that inspirational force? Who's been that hero that's allowed you to evolve and to get to where you're at today?
Joe, it's such a great question because nobody gets anywhere on their own. Like
Yeah.
you need people in your life to serve as, excuse me, as mentors or as exemplars. And I'm privileged to have had many. In the book, I write about people who along the way I modeled, let's say, my teaching after, like the great Eddie Torres, who's called the king of mambo dancing in New York City. He's another New Yorican who was born in East Harlem, Spanish Harlem, but who became really the world's foremost expert on mambo and salsa dancing in the 80s and 90s. He was somebody whose teaching style I admired and patterned myself after. My great friend Teddy Kern, who's the co-founder and artistic director of Dance Manhattan, a fantastic uh, dance studio in New York that I was on the staff of for many years. She taught me how to bring a sense of joy and a sense of humor to my instruction, and to remember that when people come to dance, they're coming to let go of stress. They're coming to have fun. They're coming to find this new aspect of themselves and to find new people to connect to. And lastly, Pierre Dulaine, the founder of Dancing Classrooms, who was a four-time ballroom dance champion, international ballroom dance champion, and when founding Dancing Classrooms, wanted to take this experience that meant so much in his life and give back to children in the New York City public school system. So he started in one school in 1994, and the program eventually grew to serve hundreds of schools nationwide. And so these are people that I count as mentors, as exemplars for me, people whose careers and whose contributions I have found really informative and instructive in how I've constructed my career. And so I hope to be somebody who kind of pays that forward.
So talk to me about the book. What was the impulsion to write the book? What was that journey like to go through your life and do this?
Oh, this is so great. I'm glad you're giving me the space to talk about this. Uh, I grew up for years feeling ashamed of the fact that I wasn't fluent in Spanish when many members of my family were. And so for years, I felt like I was not authentically Puerto Rican, right? Because how can you be Puerto Rican or Dominican or Colombian or fill in the blank if you're from a Latin American country or a Caribbean nation and not speak Spanish, right? That's supposed to be part of your heritage. And so I felt a lot of shame around that, not because I was any less Puerto Rican, but because I made myself feel that way. And sometimes I was made to feel that way because I was made fun of for not speaking Spanish well. And so I took Spanish in high school and I thought that would be the antidote. I said, all right, well, if I actually learn to speak Spanish, this will go away. Well, interestingly enough, when I learned how to speak Spanish, the teasing became different. The teasing was, oh, well, you sound like a gringo when you speak Spanish
Uh,
because your Spanish sounds like it comes from a textbook, not like it comes from the neighborhood. And so I was in this damned if you do, damned if you don't position when it came to my language. And it's hard because if you're a person who isn't Latino and you're learning how to speak Spanish, you're given lots of grace, right? Because it's not your culture, it's not your heritage. You're not expected to speak that language. So you can be speaking incorrectly, you can be making mistakes, you can be, and you just get to say, I'm learning. But when you're within that culture and you're doing the same thing, you're not given the same grace. And that's not just in the Latino community, that's in any community, right? Any immigrant community goes through this. And so I found myself feeling very defensive, very resentful over this situation that I felt like, well, this was my parents' fault, right? Um, I became a salsa dancer and realized, wait a minute, there's more than one way to kind of peel this banana. There's more than one way to experience your culture authentically. And so salsa, because it is very much a product of the New York Puerto Rican community in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, uh, it became a new way for me to latch onto that. So if you fast forward a bunch of years, I'm now in the salsa community. I'm a salsa dancer. I'm a salsa performer, and I was part of a dance company that the director of this company, Addie Diaz, found this incredible song. It's a Latin jazz tune called "I Don't Speak Spanish, but I Understand Everything When I'm Dancing," and it was on the Cubop record label. And she brought this to a rehearsal one day and said, I've got this idea for a choreography to this tune. And it's a woman doing spoken word poetry in English
yeah.
about how she doesn't speak Spanish, but the culture comes through the dancing. And I said, if that doesn't speak directly to my experience, nothing does.
Yeah.
So that song lodged itself in my consciousness for 15 years. And a few years ago, this was post COVID, going back to the COVID question, after really wrestling with, well, who am I professionally? I sort of came to this realization that at heart, I'm an educator. And at heart, I've got a lot of really wonderful things to offer. One of them is not just the power of social dance, but also the power of this story of coming to grips with how do I reconcile the lack of ability to speak Spanish fluently with the fact that actually I speak this other language incredibly fluently, and that's the language of dance.
Yeah.
And so, through a series of happy accidents and giving talks and presentations on the topic, I was finally able to just write this book and say, I've got to do this in book form. And I'm happy to say that the book has been written and it'll be released next month.
So talk to me a little bit about what motivates you to love dance, to love this, to love this world that you give people the joy, because it used to be dancing was a social lubricant. It was a way of people to really communicate, and it kind of went away. but you're infusing people with that love. What motivates you every day to give that to people and to also take care of your own soul?
So the first answer is I saw what it did for me. What dance did for me, first salsa and then other dances that I picked up along the way. What salsa dance did for me was it gave me these incredible gifts. First, it gave me the gift, in my case, as a Puerto Rican from New York City, it gave me instant identification with my heritage and with my culture. Secondly, it gave me this incredible outlet for connection, for social interaction. When you're on a dance floor or you're in a dance class with people, you're meeting people from all walks of life. You're meeting people that you would never otherwise come into contact with. Uh, every racial and ethnic background walked into my dance studio. Every profession, every socioeconomic class, because it was a place where you could find joy, movement, human connection, physical fitness, if that was your thing. And you get over time, you gain mastery if you stick with it, like anything else. You get better at it and you can see progress. And so, dance, whether I was teaching children or whether I was teaching adults, if you're a professional, depending on the industry you're in, you might work for years before you ever see the results of your labor, right? You might work in an industry and put in, 50, 60-hour weeks, but never see the result or the impact of your work, maybe because you work in a large company or something. And there's nothing wrong with that. But as a dancer and as a dance teacher, I always saw immediate results. I got almost instant gratification every time I saw someone pick up a step that they didn't think that they were going to get, or master a new skill that they didn't that months ago felt impossible. So that impact for me as a dancer, that impact for me as a teacher of dance was absolutely, it was like a shot in the arm every time. So when I get to give that to somebody else, when I get to create spaces where people experience that joy themselves, it's truly a gift and a privilege.
I feel like your book being released right now is about as timely as it can get with all of the immigration issues, war, all of these things that we've kind of walked into in America, so to speak,
Yeah.
that's quite frightening, creating a lot of stress. And I think having that outlet of dance, having that outlet of that joy, and combined with what you went through and how you had to kind of assimilate into this country, do you feel like the timing of this book is perfect?
I have to say, I didn't start. And I'm being completely transparent and honest with you. The writing of this book was not written with this idea
Sure.
of timing, right? Like,
Yeah.
and yet, I believe it's absolutely on time. I believe it is absolutely a message that needs to be explored right now because we do have national conversations about race, ethnicity, DEI, affirmative action. These are things that are in the media. They're in the popular discourse. They're in at least in the United States anyway. They're in uh, the judicial system. Right, we're navigating what it means, at least in the United States, what it means to be American, what it means to be a citizen, what it means to belong, Joe.
Yeah.
And so what this book is ultimately is it's my uh, I guess my thoughts, my opining on what it means to truly belong.
Yeah.
And I think that because language in particular, right? Language is, I don't want to say it's uniquely human because, the animals have their own language. But the way we do language is uniquely human and it is centered in how we identify ourselves, right? The first we rejoice when a baby speaks its first words, right? We get excited when we learn how to say something in another language, when we travel, and when we're able to order our dinner in a language that's not our own. language is central to how we see ourselves. And so if I can bring a measure of healing and a measure of closure for people who feel discriminated against because of their language, who feel shame because they can't speak their heritage language, or maybe who feel shame or stress because they can, but they can't pass it on to their children because they feel like they're letting their children down. Because, well, I can speak the language from the old country, but we're in America now and we don't need to do that. Or I want to, but they don't want to, right? Because they're into their full assimilation process. So, you know, this isn't about not speaking English. We're in the United States, and the English is it's the language of commerce. It's the language of society, and that's great. But I think what we should not do is we should not marginalize and discriminate over folks who speak a different language, because it is in the variety and the diversity of languages that we're stronger as a nation.
So if you had a dream tonight, ran into a 18-year-old version of you, and there was a film projector and you walked in and you hit play and it showed your life, a 60-second highlight reel, would that young version of you believe your life turned out this way?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
First of all, I was an artist. I was always an artistic kid. I was always someone who loved to dance, who loved music, who loved acting and the performing arts and music. I played trumpet as a young child. Like, I loved the arts. But that teenage version of Rodney never saw himself having a career in the arts, because the arts were diversion. The arts were leisure. The arts were entertainment. The arts were something you did for fun or on the side. Only people who had certain kinds of lifestyles could actually make a living in the art, right? Like, in the arts. I was supposed to be a journalist. I was supposed to be a writer. I was supposed to be, I thought I was going to be a reporter or something like that. Or I was going to end up in PR or business. So if you played that tape or that video for 18-year-old Rodney, and he saw himself being a salsa dancer, being a teaching artist, uh, uh, being a nonprofit leader, uh, he wouldn't have known what to make of that. He would have thought that you were pulling his leg a little bit.
So the one thing that can change the trajectory of our lives are those random acts of kindness that happen to us. What's one of the nicest things that anybody's done for you?
Well, I have to say, in chapter 8 of the book, I talk about the importance of mentors and having people in your life that are looking out for you. And there was a time in my adolescence where my parents were just going through a very difficult time, a very volatile period in their relationship and in their marriage. They eventually divorced when I was 17. But during that period, I had these two wonderful people, people who were members of the church I was attending, who really took me under their wing. They saw that I was a young man who not just had potential academically and what have you. They saw the person who I was, and these were two folks who, they were a married couple who didn't have children of their own, but who saw the importance of giving back and using whatever privilege and space they had to create safe spaces for the young people around them. And they kind of just took me under their wing and gave me all kinds of mentorship and advice, and especially in those high school years, which can be volatile and hormonal, and just a time when you're going through a lot of development and change. Because my parents couldn't be at that time, they couldn't be that steady hand. Uh, these two folks were just fantastic uh, role models, and they stood in the gap for me, and changed the trajectory of my life in some really beautiful ways. And so I think that's one that really comes to mind.
So when you look in the big rear view mirror of your life, of everything that you've done, overcome, and achieved, what are you ultimately the happiest about, the proudest of?
I am the proudest of it's a 1A and a 1B. I think the 1A is that I've been able to, for the most part, for the most part, and with help from others, I've been able to carve out a career that I'm proud of, that I believe has made a difference, that I believe has had an impact, and one where I have seldom had to sacrifice my values, undermine my values. I believe that I have very rarely, if ever, had to really compromise my integrity in any meaningful way. Um, I've been able to live and make a contribution in my work that I believe has made a difference and that's been aligned with my values. The 1B is I have two incredible sons who are 21 and 22 years old, and I believe that I've been able to model for them a life that does that, a life that says, you, this is something you can do. You may not always love your work. Your work will not always be, candy and roses, but you can forge a life, a career, and a livelihood that brings you joy, and that makes a contribution, and that allows you to still pay attention to the important things like family and faith and spirituality and community. And so I think those two are the things I'm most proud of.
So, Rodney, at the end of the day, the man behind the proverbial mission, behind the book, behind everything that you do, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, fans, colleagues, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I am a New Yorican from the Bronx who has uh, done his best to live a life of service and contribution, and who cares that other people get to do the same.
Beautiful. So if anybody wants to pick up the book, they want to dive more into your world, any of the good business, where do they
Yeah.
go?
Well, I think first come and join me in my at my website, rodneyericlopez.com. And there you can find not just all of my socials, you can subscribe to my newsletter, you can subscribe specifically to be on my on the mailing list for my book. I don't speak Spanish, but I understand everything when I'm dancing. And you can find all of that at rodneyericlopez.com. And I would love to be in community with anybody who's in the same.
I love it. I will put links in the show notes. Rodney, what a joy, man. Thank you so much for your spirit, for your story. Best of luck on the book, man.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate it.
Thank you.